this morning. Got him there a little early, Griff.
And good thing, because it's full of really detailed info.
It is. The best part is if you look here and you read along with me, and you can just see you've got about 30 pages, right, of black lines. All of these pages are blank, and then I finally get to the first
they're
page.
all sources of methods.
The first page, where after 30-something pages, 35 pages of blank lines, it says, conclusion, as discussed above, the FBI believes that Page has been collaborating and conspiring with the Russian government.
Which, of course, he denies.
Again.
Which, of course, he denies.
So, by the way, this is all evidence that ultimately led to getting a FISA warrant to surveil Carter Page, who is a former advisor on the Trump campaign. And this ultimately led to, in part, to what is going on right now in the Mueller investigation. And what you find reading these documents, and you have dissected this more than anybody, is a big portion of it goes back to the dossier, right?
Correct.
The Christopher Steele dossier. Christopher Steele is discredited, by the way, in these documents, but the dossier is not. The dossier is used.
Not only in part, I mean, this is the fundamental, and as we're learning, because of Tom Fitton. And actually, you know, the president's been tweeting this morning. He's been busy. He's tweeting congratulations. I'm just going to put that up. Congratulations to Judicial Watch and Tom Fitton on being successful in getting the Carter Page FISA documents. As usual, they're ridiculously heavily redacted, but confirm with little doubt that the Department of, quote, Justice and FBI misled the courts, witch hunt, rigged, a scam. There's obviously some editorial in there in terms of the president's view of it, but we now know the confirmation that source number one was the Steele dossier, was Christopher Steele, which the FBI ultimately dismissed as a source, but yet Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General in charge of the Mueller investigation, has signed off on moving it forward. I know you've been holding
can I get camera one just for 1 second, really quick? The dossier wasn't just a source or a major source. It was source number one. The Hillary Clinton DNC-funded dossier, unverified, salacious, dirty dossier, source number one for this FISA application. We had Andy McCarthy on the program. He was shocked because he thought there's no way the FBI would approve this type of surveillance, which, again, another part before I get to that. Inside this, it's probably standard for FISA applications. The same authorities that are given under this application may incidentally acquire other foreign intel info during the process. Would make Carter Page have been the nose under the tent, the foot under the door to get inside the Trump campaign and get information on them.
So Andy
McCarthy was shocked that this information would be allowed unverified to be the basis.
And not just signed by James Comey, who had to sign off on this, but also he talks about the judges that had to sign off as well. Here's what he told us earlier on the show.
I'm really embarrassed because I told people for months that this could never, ever happen. What I told people was that you're not even going to hear about the dossier when we finally learn what's in the FISA warrants. When you read this thing, it's astonishing. They actually, it's as if they took the dossier and slapped
whole
a
cloth
district court caption on it and gave it to the judge, which I must say, I mean, this is so bad that they ought to be looking at the judges who signed off on this stuff, not just the people who gave it.
You know, a little context here. Andrew McCarthy, who is as good as anybody on this, points out just on page 53 of 412 pages, the FBI has reviewed this verified application for accuracy. The fact is, we know that it is not verified. There is not an accuracy matter, but you are also being inundated with a lot of other sources that McCarthy talked about. Here's what he said about blasting the sources that were used to obtain continual warrants. Listen.
What they did here was they have this guy Steele who helped them in another case. And they don't have any idea who his sources are. His sources are unidentified. They're Russians. And they themselves are operating on hearsay information. So for the most part, even his sources are not claiming that they saw and heard the things that they're asking the judge to rely on.
When the president talks about not being comfortable with his intelligence agencies for a long time, this is kind of application is exactly why he's justified in saying that. We put up a couple of times what I've called in reading it the deep state signature page. You look at the people that actually signed off on this. You've got James Comey signing off, but you've also got, you know, John Kerry and Andy McCabe and Brennan and Clapper and Susan Rice and Sally Yates and a bunch of signatures that are redacted. Maybe Peter Strzok. We don't know. You can only speculate. But there's reason to be skeptical if media reports And media reports were used, as Andy McCarthy pointed out, for the second and third application because they never found anything on Carter Page, even though they accused him.
Yeah, well, and Rod Rosenstein, by the way, who is helping lead all of this up, right? We talked to David Bossie, who is Trump's former deputy campaign manager, and he had some tough words for Rosenstein. The questions that he needs to face, he calls on him to recuse himself from this. Here's that.
Rod Rosenstein must recuse himself, and it calls into question his judgment as somebody who is fighting Congress for the release of these documents. Now we understand through this redaction or through this release of documents that he actually signed the document to allow the FISA warrant. I don't understand how he could oversee this, and now I understand, and it calls into question the judgment at the top levels of the Department of Justice and FBI.
You know, one of the things that Andy McCarthy said as soon as we put him on was that he was shocked that this actually did get released. But now that it has been released, and as we've been talking, this is big news. This isn't a one-day story. This is going to go on. The questions raised on Rod Rosenstein, whether or not he recuses himself, this raises into question, as the president's been tweeting, where the Mueller investigation heads now, and whether or not the president, who is the ultimate declassifier, if it came to it, the president could declassify all of these redacted segments, whether or not we will learn more, because now the American people are going to demand, as Mark Meadows of the House Freedom Caucus says, for more transparency.
And what about Hillary Clinton's involvement in the DNC? When we talk about this dossier and Christopher Steele, if they are crediting the dossier for evidence here, they also left out the involvement of Hillary Clinton in the DNC in those early days.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a real problem.
In this declassification, early on page, I believe, 16, they talk about U.S. person one that we believe, Fox News believes, in our reporting, is Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS with the ties to the DNC, to Hillary Clinton. So more on that.
So you want as much redacted to not reveal sources and methods. Meadows included that as well. But you look at all those redactions and how much has been withheld by the DOJ and the FBI. And you just can't help but be skeptical that at the high levels, there's people still covering people's backs, trying to not get embarrassed, and they don't want this information coming out. We've heard so much misinformation. So to finally get documents that point out, that admit that the dossier was the source of this, has to call into question the Mueller probe, and has to call into question, as Meadows said, as Bossie said, the role of Rod Rosenstein. If Jeff Sessions recused himself for meeting a couple guys and being on a campaign, if Rosenstein's now in charge of the Mueller probe and verified, unverified, and approved things that are not valid, I don't know how he can be perceived as fair, let alone what the president calls the 13 angry Democrats, the Clinton supporters that are digging in to the past. And they haven't found anything yet on Carter Page, yet they have all that surveillance. It just feels sloppy, and it just feels targeted and political.
And as you said, these are not low-level employees within the DOJ and the FBI. These are the people at the very, very top. And I think this begs the much bigger question of our country and what we should stand for, and how significant should the evidence be to get a warrant on somebody? Should politics ever be at play in something as big as this?
Right. In the politics, you know, there's one more fold that we talked a little bit with Andy McCarthy about, and that is that while this was signed off on, it was signed off on by a redacted name FBI agent. Yeah. And we've seen so much about Peter Strzok, so much about Lisa Page. Andy believes that perhaps behind closed doors, some of the officials know who that name is, but we may yet learn there's more bias.
We know who testified last week, a couple weeks ago, Peter Strzok. We saw what he said about Trump, how he felt about Trump. Doesn't it make you believe that when he signed that signature, he was hoping to sign the end of the Trump campaign, hoping to sign the beginning of the Hillary Clinton campaign? I'm sorry, but you can't look at those texts and look at this document and not feel like bias was involved, and that means it's political surveillance, and that's not acceptable in our republic.
Yeah, a lot of big questions remain. So stay tuned for all of this, because there's some big news here. But